Good morning, everyone, and or good afternoon, I should say, depending on where in the world you are watching us. Michael will be starting the webinar in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to ask him to share his screen with all participants to make sure that everybody can see the screen properly. And just as you all know, my name is Desi. I usually host these webinars on behalf of Toon. I am the marketing communications person here, and I'm joined by Michael Wiesmeier. Michael is a seasoned animator, instructor, artist, painter, animator, and many things actually. And he's a great asset to Toon Boom for many reasons. One being his world-wide experience and years of knowledge in the industry. He's worked at Disney, many different arms of Disney animation, and he's worked in Australia, he's worked in Spain, he's worked in Italy. He's of American descent, so he spent a lot of time obviously in California and in Burbank more specifically. So he's really come to Toon Boom with much experience and lots of knowledge. So if you, as you all know, obviously you've joined today's webinar because you are interested in paperless animation, basically the digital future of animation, if we could say. Just to give you a small example, right now we've noticed that there's a huge turn in the industry in terms of where we're going and where the future of the industry really is. And we've noticed that Japan right now is probably the biggest adapter and adopter of paperless animation. They're really embracing the digital pipeline and embracing harmony as well. So this is why most of you are here today. Just to give you another example, some of the biggest American shows that are done completely digitally are most notably from Bento Box, Bob's Burgers, and also the whole slate of primetime animation shows that are produced by Fox and Bento Box together. In terms of movies right now, Klaus, which is scheduled to be released in 2018 or maybe 19, depending on production, is done in a digital pipeline. And of course, they're both using Toon Boom Harmony. And as you all know, we are the leader in the industry, and Michael's going to show us exactly why we have such a wonderful software that's really cutting edge. So without any more delays, I'm going to pass it over to Michael. As you can see, now you can all see what Michael looks like. He's up on your screen. And what I will also say is that we'll reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes of this webinar for questions, whether you may have them. Please put them into the question section of the webinar program, which is on the right side of the screen. You'll see there's a little tab for you to put in your questions. And at a later date, this webinar will be placed onto our website and uploaded to toonboom.com/webinars, and you'll be able to watch it again. And if at the end of this webinar you would like the scene files, you can always email us and we can help you out as well with that. So with no further ado, I pass it over to Michael.
Thanks, Desi. That's a very generous and nice introduction. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Welcome. And for those of you who were at the webinar last week that I did, welcome back. And for those of you who are joining my one of my webinars for the first time, welcome. And it's really great to have you here. And I just want to echo what Desi said about it being a crucial time in the sort of the history or story of animation. And I think it is very exciting that Toon Boom is playing a big role in, I think, the renaissance of traditional animation with projects like Klaus, and that we're able to do it now much more efficiently. And we'll see in this in this webinar how to use Harmony's tools to create traditional paperless frame-by-frame animation, and specifically be talking about the rough animation stage. For myself, having worked in traditional paper-based animation for a lot of different studios around the world, I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share my experience of now working in Toon Boom Harmony paperless. And for me, Harmony gives it a real traditional paper animation-like experience with its really outstanding bitmap brush tools, which these bitmap brush tools are complemented with the efficient time-saving tools that you have to use at your disposal. So, and that includes throughout the rough and the cleanup animation stages. So my focus for today's webinar is to show you how to get the most from Harmony's tools when you create rough animation. I will be conducting another webinar in the near future where I'll continue the story by showing you how to efficiently create cleanup animation using Harmony's other wonderful tools, the vector drawing tools. So let's get started. Okay, so I've prepared a short little 3-frame beginning of an animation, classic take kind of animation, character looking one direction, they turn the other direction with an anticipation in the middle. So what I'm going to do is open another file and kind of start the process of what I was working on here from scratch. I won't do the whole thing because we don't have time for that, but I'll at least start the process and walk you through and talk you through what I find to be some of the most important tools to give you that traditional animation kind of experience, drawing on paper kind of experience. So I'm going to switch to another file here, and I'm going to move the interface down. Okay, so I am drawing on a Cintiq here, a Wacom Cintiq, and that is another factor that really contributes to having a pencil and paper feel. If you are able to draw on one of those, it's really, as you'll know, it's really a great experience because there's absolutely no disconnect between where your hand is and where your line is appearing. Drawing on a tablet is great too, but the Cintiq is definitely the way to go if you can. Now, before we get into the software, I just wanted to give you a low-tech or no-tech suggestion, if I can, which is when you're drawing either on a Cintiq or on a tablet, to get that additional paper, your hand moving on paper kind of feel, you can wear a drawing glove. And they sell these many different stores, websites. I won't recommend any particular ones, but they're just drawing gloves. I think they're made out of neoprene. But you can also just go to the pharmacy and just buy some plain old white cotton gloves. And that's what I do because I go through a lot of them and they're really inexpensive. And then what you do is just cut off the fingers, the ends of the fingers on the cotton glove, including the thumb one, and then you draw with that on your hand, and it really makes a big difference in the way it feels. And your hand doesn't get stuck on the screen or on your tablet, especially when you're working a lot of hours and your hand starts to perspire. Okay, so getting into Harmony. Now, we're talking about rough animation this time. So we are right now in a bitmap drawing layer. And I can tell in Harmony that I'm in a bitmap drawing layer because I have access to my brush here. My other tools here are grayed out. And to adjust my my brush, I'm going into my tool properties, and in Harmony 12 there are an extensive variety of brushes that you can experiment with, and I really encourage you to do that, to if you have access to Harmony. If you don't, you can download it from the website and try it out. Is to try out some of these different pencils and really see what inspires you, and what gives you, which kind of brush tip gives you the most comfort, or feels the most comfortable to you. I really like the stippling brush as well as the brush on cloth, but I'm just going to pick one to get started on this example. So I'm going to just start approximating the drawing that I was showing you a moment ago of this bear character who's just kind of looking over in this direction. And I'm drawing very loosely, and that's a really nice thing about drawing with the bitmap brushes, is that it allows you to draw in a really loose, rough way as you do on paper. And some animators like to work more rough than others, but I really like to kind of experiment as I'm drawing. And with the bitmap brush, you can really do some more over here. You can get very scribbly and just kind of explore and find the drawing, find the pose that you're wanting to communicate. So I've got a really simple drawing here. I'm going to go to the next frame, and now I want to see the drawing before, so I turn on my onion skin. So that's another factor or property of Harmony that is so like the traditional animation experience, is that you have the onion skin so that you can see your before and after drawings, before and after the one you're currently working on. And right now I'm drawing on one of the sub layers here. A really nice thing about Harmony is that you have 4 sub layers within each drawing layer. And usually these sub layers are associated with cleanup, line, and color art. So each one has a different letter: O for overlay, L for line art, C for color, and U for underlay. But when we're talking about rough animations, we can also take advantage of these sub-layers that we have as we're building up our animation scene. So for example, right now I'm drawing on the line sub-layer. Let's say that I also want to put in, say, an arc. First, I will draw my second position here. The character is going to turn towards this direction. Okay, so let's say that between these two poses, I want to draw an arc, say, for his nose, but I don't want to put it on that same sublayer. So I can use my other sublayers to put things like arcs. So I can choose another color. And draw in my arc. So your sublayers are there in your rough animation to give you guidance in your animation. But at the same time, you don't need to see all that when you do your line test, because I'll show you later, you can hide your sublayers when you do your actual line test. So back to my other sublayer, I can continue working on my animation and draw the other, back to my other color, and draw my other pose between these two. This is a squash here. And as I'm drawing, I want to use my keyboard shortcut to flip to see how the movement's going. Now I notice right here that this drawing is a little bit too big. So instead of redrawing it, this is one of the benefits of animating in Harmony. Instead of redrawing it, I can just select it and resize it so that it works with my other drawing. So real time-saving factor in working digitally, as well as being able to rotate, try out different angles, basically using the tool to help you experiment to get the best product, get the best result that you can. Now, another tool that I really like in working digitally in Harmony is called the cutter. And the cutter tool is great when you're working in bitmap because you can select parts of your drawing. For example, maybe I want to exaggerate the mouth, the squash on the mouth, and move it up a little bit higher. So using my cutter tool, I can just cut out that part and select that part of my drawing, move it up, move it around, and then go back, continue drawing, and kind of integrate it back into my drawing. So it really, I find that using this tool really encourages experimentation because you can do it very, very easily, very quickly using the tools. Now, so far I've just been drawing, but when you do traditional paper animation, there's a lot of erasing involved, as you know, all you animators out there, because you want to get the best possible results. So you're always interacting, reacting to your drawings, and doing a lot of erasing. So one of the things for me that gives me a paper-like experience in Harmony is in the eraser using this scraper rough paper eraser, and I can adjust the flow on the eraser and the opacity. In other words, how hard it erases. I can adjust these, and I can just knock back my line.
Michael, we've had a couple people asking what version or what model of Cintiq are you on? And I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's a 21 inch.
It's a 21 inch.
It's a 21 inch, and I believe it was acquired 2 years ago, so I believe it's the 2014 model Cintiq, and I think it varies in price depending on where you are in the world. But it is in the thousands range for sure, and also depends on your currency and shipping
and there are competitor
yes.
competitor companies now.
Exactly.
There's Enova, and they have very competitive prices. So
it's interesting.
Probably a good idea to go try, if you can, try them out and see which one works best for you.
We always recommend you do your research when it comes to buying a Cintiq or a drawing tablet of that sort, because they are quite an advanced investment, and they do come in different sizes, and sometimes you have different requirements as well. So I mean, some of us are lucky enough to work in a studio where we have access to one directly. But if you don't and you are a freelancer and you have to work at home, go and do your research. Also go onto wired.com and do some product research as well, and see what reviews are out there and see what you can actually figure out. And also, we've had another question about the iPad Pro. So unfortunately, at the moment, Harmony does not run on the iPad Pro. Is it something we're thinking about doing? Is it in the pipeline? I can't really say. I can't speak for our R&D team, but we know it's there. We're aware of the demand, and we have a great team behind us, and we're always keeping an eye out on what the new trends and what the new hardware is out there. So, stay tuned. Maybe something will change, but at the moment, we do not support the iPad Pro. Funny enough, we do support the Windows tablets. So there are versions of the Windows tablet.
Microsoft
Surface Pro. Exactly, the Surface Pro. There are versions of it that just came out recently, but there was the original version which came out in 2013, and it really worked seamlessly with our technology. So Microsoft did a really great job in terms of designing a tablet that was meant for artists. So if you are looking for a tablet, we're not plugging Microsoft's Surface Pro, but if you are in need of one and you have to use Harmony, we can vouch for that one for sure. So thanks everyone for asking those great questions.
Yes, great questions. So as you can see here, when I click on this eye icon, the eye icon, that's a preview of all of my sublayers together. So if I have the eye icon disabled, I'm only seeing the drawing layer that I'm on. But for example, if I want to check my arc, which I've drawn on this other sublayer, I can do that by temporarily turning on the preview so that I can see if I'm following my arc, and then turn it off and go back to drawing in my layer. Now, what I was just talking about before about the eraser, I really like being able to use this rough eraser because it allows me to erase partially and to see what I did before, so that I'm seeing my own process, and it helps me to interact more with my own drawings instead of, if it was just a hard eraser, I would just be destroying everything that I just did. So the rough eraser together with the bitmap brush is a really, really nice combination. So I encourage you to try out the bitmap brushes and also the rough paper eraser. And you can make that bigger or smaller just by holding down the O key. That's a really nice keyboard shortcut. So I'm actually drawing here on the Cintiq, and I've got my other hand on my computer using keyboard shortcuts so that I can navigate really quickly and save time using shortcuts instead of buttons. Buttons are great too, but I prefer the shortcuts. So this is one kind of an early iteration of some, of my poses. And this is the time really in the first pass to really experiment. So, you have great tools like the cutter to grab parts of your drawing, rotate it, rescale it, try things out. You can even make selections and distort them. So you can play around with pushing your squash and stretch a little bit more, see how it looks. And if it doesn't work out, just undo a few times and you're back to where you were. Now, another feature I just wanted to mention is this one under the select tool called reposition all drawings. So if you're working on a short or a long sequence of animation in your timeline, and you realize that you need to move all your drawings over a little bit, or you need to rescale them, in traditional animation you would have to basically rip your pegs off your drawings and retape them and all that. In harmony with the reposition all drawings, you can reposition all the drawings in your scene at the same time. Or say I needed to rescale everything, I could rescale all my drawings at the same time. Or maybe I want to experiment with pushing all my poses a little bit more. I can do that. So the reposition all drawings, another tool that I encourage you to check out. So the few things I've mentioned so far about experimenting with the layers are for your first rough pass, drawing arcs. This is an arc here. And as well, you can use other sublayers for things like a chart. So if you use spacing charts, you can put that on another sublayer. You'll have that as your reference, and you won't have to have it on the same layer as your drawing. And where this becomes really, really useful, again, is when you do your basically your pencil test. You can hide the other layers and you won't see them. They won't show up in your pencil test. So I've done a really rough version of these three poses, and now I can go to my next layer, which is my overlay, and I can draw. I'll choose another color, maybe a darker color. And what I want to do here is work over what I did in my previous pass. So in this pass, maybe I'll start constructing a little bit more carefully. Once I've gotten the pose that I'm happy with, I can do a construction pass on this layer, still seeing the other layer beneath as a reference. And then I can turn that on and off by clicking on the preview icon. So I would just continue the same process with a different color. Now, let's say that I've drawn this layer, but I realize I'd like to change the color of those lines. Well, I can't just select the lines like in a vector layer and just change the color in my palette, but what I can do when I'm animating rough, if I want to change the color of a line, is use in the tool properties for my brush what's called a Repaint Brush, and choosing my new color. If I make my brush really big, go change the line color very easily like that. So that's another technique that you can try out.
That's great, Michael. Just I wanted to let you know that a lot of people are giving you great feedback, and they're all saying that you do such a great job and really detailing the importance of the software, and some great little tricks here and there. Do you have the time for one or two questions before we go to the next chapter?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So here's one from Victoria, and she said, "Are you able to export background images into Harmony?"
Yes, absolutely.
That's great.
And you can also, as well, if I can just add, you can also save any element, whether it's animation, backgrounds. You can save those elements in your library area of Harmony. So that's a great question.
That's great. One more question before we move on. Miriam is wondering, can you reposition drawings on multiple layers?
Thinking of an example.
As you're thinking about an example, we have a couple people asking about cost for Harmony. I'm not going to give you the cost over this webinar, but all the pricing is accessible on our website. So you just go to toonboom.com and you go to the Harmony section, and there's pricing there. The only reason why I can't give you pricing, or I prefer not giving you pricing during this webinar, is because really this is not a webinar where we're trying to sell our software. And secondly, it depends what kind of artist you are. So we have 3 versions of Harmony. So there's Harmony Essentials, Harmony Advanced, and Harmony Premium. So basically it goes from the beginner level hobbyist really to the freelancer to the big studio network. So it really depends on your skill set. Then it also depends whether you want to do a subscription-based model of payment, or if you want to buy a full license. Then it also depends whether you're going to buy the support, or what level of support you require. So there are different factors involved. And then a third factor as well is if you're a student. And then also there's the idea of currency. And if I quote you a price now, maybe you're in a different part of the world. Maybe you are in Japan or China or the United States. So again, our pricing is quite fair. You have to always keep in mind that there is an R&D team here and a support team. So when you are paying for the technology, it's not that we don't check in with you. We are always here to answer your questions. And really, at the end of the day, if Disney is one of our biggest clients, you have to remember that the software is tested and the software is really guaranteed to meet your needs. So I'm sorry if that took a long time to answer that question, but please do visit our website at toonboom.com, and you can definitely get a good feel for the pricing structure.
Thanks, Desi. So I just wanted to re-emphasize the point of taking advantage of the sublayers. Again, there are 4 sublayers for each drawing. For each drawing layer in your timeline, there are 4 sublayers, and that is to build up your scene. Very few animators can just do one first pass of an animation and then say, okay, I'm done and I'm going on to the next scene. It's a real, in my experience at least, it's a real interactive process where you put down your idea, you put down your pose, and then you react to it, you interact, and you find ways to make an even stronger statement. And that's where the sublayers come in, because you can work over your previous pass without destrowing it, and by seeing it, and then as you flip in your timeline, you're also able to see, oh, am I still following? Am I keeping my original idea as I'm working along? Now, some other tools that you may or may not be aware of in Harmony that really add to the traditional paper, drawing on paper kind of feel are that there is a rotary disc. So I can turn my drawing in any direction, which really helps with using and taking advantage of the natural movement of my arm and drawing with my whole arm from the shoulder. So and it's also really comforting. You know, we're talking before about the whole comfort factor. Especially if you're coming to digital from paper. For me, when I first saw this rotating disc, I felt really at home because it's something that I used for years and years, and now I have a digital version of it, which allows me to be even more efficient. So again, another tool to help you out while you're working.
Just in the meantime, some people are asking questions more related to being a cleanup artist. And, you know, Michael does have some experience in that. And I will say that at some point later in the season, we will be doing a webinar on harmony and being a cleanup artist. It is very crucial in our industry to be a cleanup artist. It really is probably one of the most important animator jobs out there, because at the end of the day, you need a cleanup artist is to really make sure your work looks sharp on a big screen. So I apologize in advance if you're not able to get to your question, but again, if you do have questions, you can always email us at webinars@toonboom.com if we don't manage to get to your question during this webinar. So again, we will have a webinar on cleanup techniques later on in the season. Thank you.
Great. So I just wanted to show what I was mentioning before about when you do your pencil test. So I'm just going to select my first drawing here, go into my X sheet, and select my first drawing. And here I'm just going to increase the exposure of that first drawing. And it's not listening to me. Okay, that happens sometimes. There we go. It's listening to me here. So I'm increasing the exposure, and you can see as I'm adding more frames of exposure for that first drawing, that it's also adding more in the timeline. So when you interact, excuse me, with the exposure sheet, you're having the same effect in the timeline, and vice versa. So now I'll go to the next drawing, increase the exposure for that one. Go by a few frames. Go to the last drawing, expose that one. And now I'm going to, because I want to make a little line test, I will put my stop frame. That's the frame where my pencil test will end. I'm going to put that at frame 23. And this button here is the render and play. It's the play button with a star on it. So when I hold down on that, I can choose render and play. And then I need to click on it a second time to actually render the movie. I'm going to do it once without hiding the sublayers, and we'll see the result that we would like to avoid, and then I'll show you how we make it so that we don't see our other sublayers.
Michael, can you tell us a little bit about the difference between vector brushes and bitmap brushes, basically?
Sure. Good question. So bitmap brushes, or bitmap layer, is pixel-based. Okay, so that means you have the advantage of your line and your strokes that you make of being more kind of having more of a softer look, like we're using right now, which is really important during the rough animation stage because you want to be encouraged. I feel encouraged by the bitmap tools to be rough and to be loose and to experiment and get my performance out. And then when I go to a vector layer to do the cleanup, the advantage there is that a vector layer and a vector line it's really a mathematical formula. It's not made up of pixels. It's resolution independent, so I can scale it up to an IMAX screen, or I can scale it all the way down to an iPhone. Say I'm doing animation and I need to scale up for one purpose and repurpose down for another thing like an iPhone. With a vector, you can do that very easily, and you keep the quality of the line. So, but when you draw in vector, you can also do a lot more editing of your lines using control points, a bit like drawing in Illustrator. So, Harmony in the bitmap layers gives you your starting point of drawing loose with pixels, and then when you go to your cleanup, which we'll talk about that in my next webinar that I'll be doing, we'll see how to use the vector drawing tools in Harmony to your best advantage. So I hope that explains or answers the question.
Yeah, it does.
It's mostly about look, but it's also about editability, and it's about scalability.
Exactly.
Great question. So when we look at the line test here, we're seeing all of the sublayers, including my spacing chart and my arc. And I don't want to see that right now. I just want to see my drawings. I just want to see these drawings. So what I can do, or what I'm going to do, is actually open the properties for this drawing layer. I'm going to do that by right-clicking and then go up to Layer Properties. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Shift-E. Okay, and now there are 4 tabs here. The only one you need to look at is the drawing one. So here are my art layers that I'm using in my drawing. So overlay, line art, color art, underlay. I'm not using them for that purpose right now. That's just what they're called. But what I want is to only see the line art. So I'm going to temporarily disable the others. And now when I redo my line test, I'm only going to see the sublayer that I want to see. So I can isolate. Now if I wanted to do a line test of my previous pass, I could do that just as easily. For example, if I wanted to see this one, I could just as easily go into my layer properties and say, I just want to see the overlay, and I don't want to see the others. So this is how you work with the sublayers to build up your scene and get the best performance that you can, so that when you go to clean up, you're cleaning up something that's really a strong statement.
Really quickly, Michael, we noticed that you made a time chart, right? Can you just maybe talk about that just a little bit? What's the use of it? What's the interest in it? How does it help us?
Sure, absolutely. Well, when you animate, there are two factors related to time. So one is how many frames an action lasts, how many frames it takes to complete the action. Okay, so from this to this, from the first frame to the last frame, I know that I'm taking 23 frames. But how I space, in other words, kind of where I put more of my drawings closer to the beginning or closer to the end, is going to give me a different look to my action. So without actually finishing this little scene, I can just say that if I put more of my drawings closer, for example, to the last frame here, change that to 23, and I want to kind of get into this pose from the first one gradually, in other words, kind of have a what's called a slow into the last pose, then I would put most of my drawings in my spacing chart, would put most of them closer to frame 23 and have fewer drawings that are closer to frame 1. So basically the action, if you can see my cursor here, is that the action is going to move faster, because there's bigger spaces between my drawings. It's going to move faster, and then as there are more drawings closer to each other, it's going to slow down. So it's faster to slower. So this is called a slow in to the last pose. And the purpose is that it also gives variety to the movement of your animation. If you made a spacing chart where the spaces were all the same, your character would move in a very monotonous velocity. It would just not change at all. And that's something that we don't want to do in animation, because it will make your character look mechanical and that it doesn't have kind of a sense of life to it.
That's a really good answer. Thank you. Just one more really quick question before we get back to it. Can you put your layers in folders? Just to avoid confusion, right? So there's been some participants have been asking, does it get confusing with all the layers, and how do you?
You mean the sublayers?
Exactly.
No, there's not a folder system for the sublayers. It's more kind of having your own, I would say, having your own approach and your own system. For example, I like to use the underlay layer for spacing charts like this one, and I like to use all three of these, so C, L, and O. I like to use all three of those for my different passes. So I use C usually for a very rough pass where I'm just basically kind of scribbling and getting out my idea, pushing my pose. L for putting it a little bit more constructing, as I was doing here. And then O would be for the last one. Remember that each of these, O is on the top.
Yeah.
U is on the bottom. So if you think of the camera or the eye is looking down, and the first thing it sees is O, and then under that is L, and then C, and then U. So if you have your own system, you will get used to it, and you'll remember which sublayer you're using for what. And you know what? Sometimes it happens that you'll put a drawing in the sublayer you didn't mean to, and you just go to the cutter tool, select what you didn't mean to put there, cut it, and then just paste it into the layer you meant to. That's a very easy thing to do. So
it's really interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
So we'll reserve the last 10 minutes or so for questions. Michael just has a few things he'd like to talk about before we wrap it up. And again, if you have any questions and we really can't have them, answer them during this webinar, please send us an email at webinars@toonboom.com. And, we're really great about getting back to you with questions. I mean, we want you to be fully functional in the software. So please don't be shy, email us. You can also post to our forums online. If you go to toon.com, there's a link to our forums. There's also a link to our community, and most of you know us on Facebook and Twitter. We don't tend to really answer technical questions on Facebook and Twitter, but definitely on our forums, and they're actively monitored by our support team and our product manager as well, Marc Andre. So again, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always here to help you.
Absolutely, we are here for you. And just to close, I just wanted to reiterate, because I've talked a lot about the sublayers, I just want to reiterate the idea of working with the bitmap brush in conjunction with the soft, this rough eraser. Again, it allows you to, I think I'm on the wrong sublayer. Okay, it allows you to interact with your drawing, to just erase some of it so that you can see where you're coming from and keep interacting with what you just did. And I really believe that's how you make the strongest statement, is to keep interacting with your original idea, and you want to see where you're coming from. So that combination is fantastic. So thanks for joining us for this introduction to using Harmony's really great tools, really to your advantage. And that's what I've shown, is how to use some of these tools to your greatest advantage during the rough animation process. And really look forward to seeing you, all of you again, for my next webinar, where I'm going to continue showing you the traditional paperless animation process with Harmony, using the vector drawing tools to create really effective and time-efficient cleanup animation. So thank you again.
Great. So we do have about 8 more minutes before we have to really just, log off. But in the meantime, I will say that we try to do a lot in terms of webinars, and we've had some questions about lip syncing. So if you just go into toonboom.com/webinars, there's actually a pretty great webinar that was done about 3 weeks ago. Regarding lip syncing, excuse me. So you can get more information there. But we do have a nice question here from Andrea, and she wants to know, do you do lip sync animation in the sub layers or in the new layer?
Well, I can say how I approach. Let me just say what I think the person's referring to is, at what point do you start working out the mouth shapes?
Exactly.
And I start doing that really later in the process. I usually start by really getting the physical performance down. So the gesture of the body, the gesture of the head, get all that really not supporting, but really being the performance. And then I usually come back maybe on a second or third pass to start putting in my rough animation. So I'm talking about during rough animation. I usually start working out the mouth positions as a support to the physical performance. So second or third pass. So we're talking about using the sub layers. So if the underlay is for charts and arcs and things like that, then I would use the other 3 to do my passes, and I would probably use the last 2 to start putting in the mouth shapes. And I usually start by drawing the mouth shapes that are accents. In other words, being selective, prioritizing, and really listening to the dialogue, listening to the words, and finding what you think is the most important part of the dialogue. And that's really what you build your physical performance around. And then from there, start filling in the rest of the mouth positions. And if I can say one more thing,
Sure.
Don't try and put in every mouth position for every single sound. Simplify. It's really much better to simplify the mouths when you animate, because that's how we talk in real life. We don't enunciate every vowel and every consonant, and it looks better if you simplify it and prioritize. So.
That's really great feedback. I never thought of that actually. So here's a cool question for Miriam. Miriam wants to know, how do you get the program to not autofill drawings between frames? Good question.
Okay, I'm gonna need to go. I'm gonna have to, take down my picture for a second. I apologize. In the preferences, let me find it here. Here we go. In the preferences under exposure sheet, it's this one here. Extend exposure of previous drawing under drawing creation. If you uncheck that box, then it won't fill in those frames.
Interesting.
And I unchecked it because I prefer it that way also myself. So great question.
Yeah, for sure. I put in the link for our forum. If anybody has any questions that you don't maybe want to ask right now, but while you're working on the technology or in the software, you can ask us questions directly on the forum. Like I said, our support team and our product manager really does monitor the forum. For those of you who can't see it on the right-hand toolbar, the website address is forum, so FORUMS.toonboom.com, and there's obviously 2 O's in the Toon and 2 O's in the B. Our forum is a really great place for you to get more information as well. As I can see, I'm on the forum right now, and our last comment was about 4 hours ago, so it is a pretty active community. And of course, you can always join us on social media. And just also, as we're wrapping it up, I would also like to say that there's a lot of material out there on YouTube. If you just go to our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see some tutorials as well, and basically a lot of testimonials as well of why people are using it, using the technology. And there is competition out there in terms of harmony and the 2D world, in television animation, in film, in gaming. But you also have to really keep in mind that if you want quality, you're really going to have to invest in it. And maybe some people might think that the technology is too hard to master, or that it's too expensive, but it really isn't. And you really just do need to sit down, watch these webinars, go to our forum, really just embrace the technology, so that at the end of the day you become a master and you do get hired by the big studios. And then at the end of the day, what would really be great is that you go out there and you do your own designs and you draw your own animations, and you work on your own projects, and then you go back and you pitch to these bigger studios and some of these big multinational companies, because at the end of the day it really is an art form, Aaron. It really is about your individual style. So I really hope that we've answered some of your questions. We've actually had a record amount of questions asked during this webinar, and that's really great. And I apologize myself for not being able to answer those questions or be able to pass them on to Michael. That being said, please do email us. Please go on the forum, go to social media, and hopefully we were worthwhile and you enjoyed the last hour of Michael's webinar. Michael, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, just that I think I think and hope that the industry is going to have a bit of a renaissance, traditional animation, because of the paperless technology through Harmony, because you get everything from the traditional paper animation. You don't lose anything, and you get efficiency. So I'm really excited about it, and I'm really excited everyone was here today. We had a lot of people here today. It's really great to see so much enthusiasm and interest. And thank you for being here, and see you next time.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.